Hey, Ali, thank you for coming in. Just remarkable everything that you're doing. Yeah, I saw this ranking by Stanford, in the top 10. Of course, your citations are through the roof. You're going to catch up and exceed Bob Langer. I know that's going to happen, yeah, even though he's like a legend in the marketplace and so on. It's just amazing what you're doing with the Terasaki Institute for Biomedical Innovation. But I'll just shorten it as either TIBI or Terasaki Institute. So really appreciate you coming in. My audiences who are doing keynotes or are doing writing, they are fascinated with the work you're leading at Terasaki. So again, really appreciate you sharing your insights with my audience.
Of course, anytime.
So, Ali, we've done a series of interviews. I interviewed your team, Richo, and of course Stuart and others, and I've done some Forbes pieces on you as well because I think the work is just outstanding. Maybe we can do a little bit of catch up. You just finished a Terasaki Innovation Summit. What were some of the key takeaways that you want to sort of highlight from that summit?
Thank you, Stephen. First of all, really appreciate the invitation. I'm really excited to be here. I've always enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for all the contributions that you have as an ambassador to the community, and really helping the Terasaki Institute get the recognition, visibility that it needs in particular audience segments that we normally do not get to. One of the things that we've been trying to do at the Institute is to really enable innovation. And the way to do it, we feel that particularly in an area like Los Angeles and Southern California, is to bring the stakeholders together for innovation, whether those are the innovators, the people who actually make the advances in the laboratory, they're the entrepreneurs, they're the early team members, the investors, and really put them under the same roof. And one of the ways we've been trying to do that is to organize this Innovation Summit, which happens annually in Los Angeles. And we bring in people from all these different segments and provide a venue for them to interact with each other. This year was also very eye-opening in terms of the people that we had come over. I think one of the key takeaways that we're seeing is how the convergence of different fields are enabling major breakthroughs. Obviously, we've been working in biological problems and medical problems for many years, but seeing how we can bring in expertise from data science or from things like new materials or new understanding of devices, and be able to combine them together in a very seamless way to solve problems that we're interested, mostly medical problems. So that was really like one of the key takeaways from the summit about how seemingly disparate fields can merge together in a very cohesive way to solve medical problems.
Are there any ones that you want to spotlight? I know the Innovation Summit has, world-class speakers, and you have teams that are working at your institute as well. Are there ones that you want to spotlight and maybe get into a little bit of detail what's really transformational that they're working on and will have a positive impact on the planet?
Of course. Well, one of the things that we highlight at the summit is really the integration of new technologies with existing medical devices. And this is something that the Institute has been championing quite a bit. One of the new advancements, which actually was also presented at the summit from the Institute, was the development of new capabilities to detect biomarkers from an individual without having to have very invasive approaches. So, for example, it's been shown that tear from the eyes can actually be able to have biomarkers that are associated with diseases like diabetes or dry eye disease, or even things related to mental health. So this ability to detect some of these biomarkers from the tear is something that we've been very excited about, but there's been very limited approaches to test this. Obviously, you don't want to have someone have to give you a tear sample to do it. So we've been interested in developing technologies that enables this in a very seamless, non-invasive manner. And one of the technologies that some of our scientists have developed is a contact lens, which is very comfortable, very much similar to existing commercial contact lenses, with the difference that it has the ability to detect these specific biomarkers in a real-time manner, so that, for example, in terms of mental health, being able to detect specific molecules that are elevated or decreased as one goes through anxiety or happiness or anger, and being able to detect those in real time and communicate that to electronic devices that can track it and provide interventions is something that we've been very excited about, and something that was unleashed at the Innovation Summit. So I think there's a variety of examples like that, but you can kind of see the kind of technologies that I'm talking about, combining existing technologies like medical devices, which are already readily used, but providing new capabilities to them to solve unmet medical challenges.
That's really fascinating. And like you said, it's not invasive, right? I mean, it's you're just normal functioning, but you have these other sensors that are able to pick up these biomarkers. You can communicate them, maybe using Bluetooth to a mobile device, and then you can log and keep histories, and it can give you an indication of some challenge or maybe even an opportunity to improve. So prevention in some way as well, right? So that's quite remarkable. There's so much work in the gut and what's happening there, and so the vagus nerve, and sort of monitoring what's happening in that space. Do you have any innovations with regards to the microbiome and then also the vagus nerve?
Exactly. So this is actually a very interesting area that was brought to my attention through a recruitment that the Institute made towards Xiling Shen, who's one of our professors who came to us through Duke University. So Xiling is an academic entrepreneur, had made very important innovations in the area of cancer therapeutics and being able to diagnose and identify proper drugs for an individual using his previous work. One of the things that he brought to the Institute is the whole idea of how do we actually address the end-stage issues associated with cancer, which is a disease called cachexia, which is basically, it's the inability of the person to eat and really digest the food, and that leads to increased weakness and muscle loss, and really causes issues that causes the end of stage life for most cancer patients. So Xiling identified that there's actual incredible brain-gut synergy that happens through the vagus nerve, and he developed tools that can be used to stimulate the nerve so that you can actually reverse some of the effects of this cachexia disease. So by having this minimally invasive electronic system that can basically signal the nerve, you can actually reverse some of these effects because of this connection that exists between the gut and the brain. So that's actually is another area that has made significant progress. More recently, that has come out as a spinoff from the Institute in terms of a new startup. that now has a life of its own and is going through early stages of development, which is really exciting because it shows that the kind of work that we're doing can bridge the gap of this translational valley of death to the other side, which is fantastic. And we've had incredible amount of experience in trying to do that, and some of it is really identifying the right researchers and the right early team members who are passionate about this and are willing to address the many different de-risking challenges that one needs to do to make these sorts of things to the level where it becomes investable and also something that is has a real practical endpoint.
That's really, really fascinating. And, I mean, that's a serious cause of, problems when people have cancer is the lack of food, or they're not getting sufficient nutrients. And that really accelerates all of the issues and, in fact, delays treatment, right? Because you're not strong enough to take on treatment. And here you have an intervention that can, excuse me, manage that and improve the well-being of that person so that they can undertake other kinds of treatment as well. There's other areas of translational research, and translational research meaning, there's a lot of researchers around the world and they're working on amazing stuff, but unless you can translate that into an effective solution that you can then scale in some way, then it just sits as an idea, basically, or a nice research idea. Are there some other ones that are really interesting that are being translated through the Institute?
Yeah, there's a few other projects that we're very excited about. Some of them really build off on our existing wins, which involve new developments in materials. So one of the things that we had done previously was to develop a material that can basically plug blood vessels. And this process, which is called embolization, is routinely used by interventional radiologists. And that we took all the way from the original idea conception all the way to de-risking it in large animal models, to starting a company that subsequently got its 510K clearance from the FDA and was sold to Boston Scientific and is now commercially used by a variety of different hospitals in the country. So that was what I would say something we did from the beginning to the end, and it was really based on materials development geared towards a specific medical problem. We kind of piggybacked off this process, and we started to interact with other clinicians who had problems that they wanted us to be able to solve. And one of the clinicians, who's a surgeon, basically came to us with the challenge that whenever he does his surgery and he puts the tissue back together and sutures it, there are leaks that he wants to prevent. In this case, these leaks cause things like infection and delay in healing. And we thought about, wouldn't it be great to have a material that has the same mechanical properties as the tissue that you want to suture together? It can actually bridge these tissues together, bring them together. It should be sticky enough that it adheres to the tissue, even in wet environments. And it should have the right biocompatibility and degradability to be able to basically go away as the healing occurs. So that was the product profile that we had in our mind. And we worked with our scientists here to develop a material that actually met those criteria. So we've now been pushing that technology forward. The clinician has been very integrated within the team and actually making this happen. And we're currently in the stages of basically launching a startup that is trying to get this to the clinic with the concept that is basically, it's like a surgical zipper, something that we can put together, basically zip it together, but it's made from this degradable material that keeps the suture lining closed and allows us to heal the injury faster. So this is something that again came out of the clinical need and our interest in meeting with the clinicians, understanding their problems and solving them. And now it's hopefully at this stage where it's going to get to the next stage and become its own success story.
That's really, really fascinating. Do you think there could be a consumer application? People out there that get cuts to put a Band-Aid over it, or they may use some kind of a glue to kind of do temporary sort of coverage of that small wound and or abrasions and things like that. Do you think there could be even a consumer application to that or not, or if the price point would work?
I think so. I obviously think that we have to be opportunistic and just see where the market need is and be able to address it. The material has very unique properties that as a materials person we're very excited about. The whole ability to have the right mechanical properties, biocompatibility, and stickiness, which is needed for a lot of these applications, is something that has gotten us very excited. But we have to still, the early applications are really geared towards the operating room and the need that the early stakeholders, in this case the clinicians and the surgeons, have communicated to us. But we're always looking for other areas where we can apply our expertise.
Kind of reminds me of Star Trek or something. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Are there any other areas maybe you want to profile, maybe two more that you think are really interesting? I mean, I know there's a lot of things you're working on, but two other ones that maybe come to mind that you'd like to put a spotlight on?
Yeah, so one of them is the whole concept of wearable conformed electronics on the skin or other places in the body to be able to address a lot of issues that we have in terms of being able to understand the state of the person, and really push forward the current wearables that we have, like the iWatch and things like that, to the next level. So one of the things that a lot of the current technologies that we wear do not do is to really look at biomarkers effectively. And I mentioned the eye and its ability to detect particular biomarkers, but the sweat and interstitial fluid, which is basically the fluid that's in between our cells, very close to the skin, both have a lot of different signals and biomarkers embedded inside them, which normally we do not utilize properly. So if you want to understand how your body is doing, you go to your checkup every 6 months or every year, and you get a blood draw, and you get a snapshot of what is happening inside your body. Well, some of these wearables that we're developing are really trying to address the challenges with that process, and to use the information that exists literally on the skin or just underneath the skin to address these challenges. So we've been making these flexible wearable electronic devices that have sensors and biomarker detection capability, as well as a full electronic integration to be able to look at sweat or interstitial fluid and be able to detect a variety of different biomarkers from them. So this is something that we think it's going to have a lot of opportunity in a variety of different diseases. Everything from things that are currently huge medical problems, like, for example, diabetes, right? Being able to use these sorts of technologies as next generation sensors for glucose detection or other sorts of diabetic treatment approaches is one thing, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where we have purely wellness goals, optimizing, happiness and optimizing athletic performance or other sorts of things, which again, you need to be able to understand the biochemistry in the body and be able to perturb it in particular ways. So those are the kind of things. Again, one other technology that we're very excited about. It's actually has spun out in a company called eSkin that is currently also pushing forward with its early stages and really trying to make an impact in this particular area.
I mean, that's really, really, really interesting. I mean, the idea of picking up traces in terms of biomarkers through your sweat or just below the skin, and then that could be used in disease prevention or management in some way. It could also be used as an intervention to optimize your health and your well-being. I can see this also having areas in longevity. There's all sorts of biomarkers in terms of longevity, and people are figuring out more and more what those pieces are. But can you imagine then it's almost like you could fine-tune levers as you're getting this information, and you can make adjustments to your lifestyle to optimize your performance or optimize your well-being and your health, and even have this maybe long-term aspect of impacting your biological age and your longevity in some way. So it's like an unlimited marketplace, right? As you get proof points through this journey. That's really quite fascinating, that work. There's a gentleman I interviewed a while back. His name is Philip Wong, and he's the chief scientist with Taiwan Semiconductor. And I was asking him about any work that he's doing at the cellular level. And he mentioned this chance kind of talk he had with a clinician at Stanford. And the clinician was saying, do you think you could put a chip in a cell? And he said, well, how big is that cell? And he gave the number, and he says, oh, well, that's like huge. And he's working on actually implanting chips in cells and having it wirelessly communicate, and then you can monitor the behavior, but you can use it in drug release, or you can use it to literally sort of manage the behavior of the cell. Is that an area that's interest to your group as well? Then going to this kind of chip level, and then having management of what's happening in the body. I could do an introduction. I'm just kind of thinking.
No, definitely. I think that's the kind of enabling technology that really pushes things. So obviously, we don't have the multi-billion-dollar fab facility that I'm sure they have in Taiwan that really enables them to build these super miniaturized integrated circuits. So we'd love to have introductions with that. And there's lots of different applications that can come from having new capabilities like what you just mentioned.
Yeah, and he's actually the leading professor in semiconductor technology. So really, really great background. He's at Stanford, so a 3-hour plane ride from you, right?
Oh, it's a 45-minute plane ride. So,
Well, yeah, that's true. I'm thinking from Vancouver, it's about 3 hours plane ride. So afterwards, I'll do a connection. I think there's a lot of benefit in you sort of exploring work.
Of course.
Now, I know I did a talk with Clarissa Aiello, and she's left University of San Diego, and she's in quantum biology. Do you think that whole aspect of quantum biology and the electromagnetic aspect of cellular behavior and being able to influence outcomes, do you think that's too far out or too outlier for the things you're working on, or?
Well, I don't. I think we have to be really open-minded towards anything, because usually things that seem like far-fetched away initially are the kind of things that lead to the biggest breakthroughs. So I haven't really done a deep dive into quantum biology and its particular applications into some of the problems that we're interested in. But I bet that there's opportunities if we actually look into that space and search for the synergy. So I'm always like, one of the things that I try to do is always continue learning and being curious about things that I don't know, and that has led to a number of breakthroughs that I've had in my career. So I think all of these and any other sorts of learning that we can do is always positive.
Yeah, she's open sourced her work too. So she's running a number of experiments so that people can follow the work she's doing. And then she's working with a nonprofit research organization, very similar to what you're doing, but really centered on quantum biology. And the ultimate sort of idea is, any kind of weak electromagnetic field, if you can modulate it, then you can non-invasively affect treatment or prevention and all the kind of things that you're working on, but try to simplify it, right? And make it widely distributed as well. I know you founded Omeat. So what's happening with Omeat?
Yeah, so excellent, excellent question. So Omeat, for folks who may not know, is a cultivated meat company. It's basically growing cells from livestock like cows in a bioreactor, in a so-called cultivator, very similar to a beer brewing process, to make large amounts of these cells to basically make meat without slaughter of animals. So we started that company about almost 3 years ago, and it's now just about to finish its next financing for Series B at this point. And it's one of those stories that has come and has had a number of, all ups and downs and, really difficult current VC market. But I'm glad that we went through and did our next financing. And where it's going right now is Omeat is on the cusp of getting a regulatory approval. We have worked quite a bit on validating the process and being able to push the technology to the level where we are comfortable that within the next, hopefully, year, we'll get our FDA basically no questions letter, no questions letter from FDA, which means that we will be one step closer to be able to sell the product to customers in the U.S. So it's really exciting because I truly believe that this is how we're going to make a lot of different food in the future, and just being at the early stages of it is really exciting. Now, the whole area of cell-based meat has taken, positives and negatives. It's become a little bit of a political issue because of the fact that there are states now that and countries that have declared that some of these future food areas may actually be against their heritage of farming and livestock growing. So it's become a political issue. There's red states versus blue states, all have their own different opinions of it. But we think that in the long term, it's actually going to be a way of producing additional choice to customers and being able to address some of the challenges, whether they're food safety and security or environmental challenges that are associated with the current food production system. It's something that we think is very similar to a lot of other technologies that have come across in the past few hundred years that initially had lots of resistance. I was quite surprised to hear that there was actually a whole ice making industry before, where they used to ship ice from the cold areas to the rest of the continent. And then when freezers came along, people were saying this is artificial ice. We are against the artificial ice, and now it's just ice. So we think that in a lot of ways it's very similar to that. We think that the fact that we have this new way of growing cells and making meat initially is going to be a little bit difficult for everyone to get grasp of. But I think as the technology matures, as the barriers come down and people taste it and are impressed by it, then it will not become cultivated meat. It will just be meat. So that's the day I'm looking forward to.
I mean, you would think that there'd be sort of wide-scale interest in countries that have a very Buddhist philosophy, because there's this idea within the Buddhist community that you don't sacrifice animals or eat insects or anything else. There's this kind of prohibition against, you know, working and having other kind of animal products and utilizing. Have you looked at that community to see if there's any interest, you know, Southeast Asia, some of the other regions of the world?
Definitely. So actually, it's one of those things that we think that U.S. may not exercise its leadership position in and may actually lose its position because of that. So some of the countries, like Singapore, for example, have already approved cell-based meat. U.S. has also approved cell-based meat, but there's just very, very limited amounts of it now in the country, so it's not anything widespread. And countries like China have actually put this sort of meat production in their future plans. In governments' 5-year, 10-year plans, they have huge interest in really disrupting and securing these sorts of food sources for the future. So it's one of those interesting areas that not only because of cultural differences, different countries will respond differently to, but it really could determine some geopolitical kind of things in the future, where there are countries that may become fully food independent because they have taken over some of these more efficient food production technologies compared to other places, which still will be reliant. So I know there's huge interest in Asia in this area. There's a significant amount of investment. Countries that have food security issues, like for example, Middle East countries, where some of these kingdoms are really trying to become less reliant on imports, have shown great interest in these sorts of technologies. And I think it's one of those things that, I think U.S. and some of the European countries really need to show additional level of support for, because it is a wave that's coming. It's just a matter of time before significant amount of food is produced using these alternative approaches. Now, cell-based, growing cells outside of animals is just one of multiple different approaches. People, obviously plant-based technologies is growing, in itself. There's other approaches that are using everything from fungi to insects to generate these proteins to other things. So I think it's just it will happen, and we just need to be cognizant of it and try to be ahead of the curve.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is, bioprinting, and, your institute is a leader in that area. How is the work going in terms of, let's say, bioprinting of organs and things like that? You're already at the early stages of investigating that, right? And can you give me sort of timelines of where you see that going?
Great question. So the Institute, the Terasaki Institute, in its previous iteration, before I actually joined the Institute a few years ago, was really the pioneer in the whole area of transplantation. So Dr. Terasaki, the way he made his contribution is to develop the assay to match recipients and donors for transplantation. So it's a part of the legacy of the Institute to always think about new ways of addressing challenges with organ shortage and organ failure. The current processes that have emerged over the past few years is to integrate a few different types of technologies. One, develop, take the best in biological sciences, everything from personalized cells that are made using induced pluripotent cell approaches, being able to take your own cells, make them into primitive cells, and then be able to get different cell types emerge from them. So that's one aspect of future of organ restoration. Another aspect which you mentioned is really related to how do we put these cells together and be able to recreate tissue structure and tissue functionality. And a lot of people, including us, believe that technologies like 3D printing applied to making tissues is a very powerful way to do that. And what it requires is the ability to be able to make cells and materials, put them together, and then in pre-programmed way, print different cell types, different material types in an organized way to create a tissue structure. So the Institute is very involved in that sort of technology, everything from making new types of printers and materials to really putting it all together. Just today, I was on a call with a government agency where the discussion was to really enable this at scales and at quality assurance and quality control processes that makes this a reality for human transplantation. So we've, the vision that we have, and we're enabling that in the vision, is to really take the best of cell biology, perhaps even be able to make one cell type that can be transplanted into every single individual because it has the immunological matching that can basically overcome some of the immune rejection processes that exist in us. Be able to grow those cells at scale in large bioprocesses, like large stainless steel vessel processes like the ones that I mentioned for what Omeat uses, and be able to get a lot of cells. And once we have the cells and we've differentiated them into the right cell types, be able to print them and do all of this in a GMP level process so that we can actually take the cells and the structures that are left, be able to put it into humanized animal models to show functionality as a prelude to actually doing human transplantation with these technologies. So that is something that's happening, and we think that it's really its government has incredible buy-in into this at this point. There is, I think, it's the perfect storm right now. Technology is there, the interest from public sources is there, and the medical problems are there to really enable this. And we've actually also been working with clinicians, including the transplant team at Mayo Clinic, to enable this. We've set up a joint collaboration with Mayo Clinic and the Terasaki Institute to enable these sorts of technologies for the future of transplantation. So having the practitioners, having the technologists all work together, I think is really important, and it's what the Institute has allowed us to do to really make the right ecosystem to push this technology forward.
You founded 3 companies. Omeat is one, but there's Obsidio Medical, which was acquired by Boston Scientific. Can you just do a bit of a snapshot of what that company did? And then, of course, you got acquired, which is always a great end state to have, right?
Yeah, so that was a really fun journey because it happened fairly fast. We worked in the technology. I met an interventional radiologist, and we brainstormed quite a bit about their medical problems, and we identified a material that we thought could solve their problems. In their case, what interventional radiologists do is they basically are the plumbers of the body. They go in with little catheters inside the blood vessels and they fix problems, whether those problems are things like aneurysms, that little balloons that pop on the side of blood vessels, or things like internal bleeding. And some of the ways they do that is to try to fill these aneurysms or actually plug the blood vessels using different sort of technologies. So commonly used approach is to use metallic coils, which a lot of times don't work and have a lot of challenges. So we said, wouldn't it be nice to actually come up with something that can solve some of the challenges with the existing technologies? And one of the type of materials that we had worked on quite a bit are these materials that are called shear thinning. They're kind of like toothpaste. When you apply pressure, they become more liquid-like, they flow. And then when you remove the pressure, they maintain their structure. So we thought, wouldn't it be great to have a material like toothpaste that you can deliver inside the blood vessels through the pressure that the clinician exerts, the material flows, fills this defect, and then we can basically solve that problem. And the material has to have a lot of properties like be good biologically, induce regeneration, and the right kind of healing processes. So we worked with the clinician to develop this material, de-risk it in small and large animal models. And that's when we started a company. And this is a good example about how important the team is. We actually started a company with different individuals trying to find the right champion, the right CEO to make the company into a success. And we went through that process a couple of times before we found an individual who really was passionate and had the right skill set to take the company from basically having data with large animals in a laboratory setting to getting FDA dossier with the right kind of quality control on every ingredient, the right steps in getting it manufactured and tested in a way that can be meet the FDA standards in terms of safety and efficacy, and finally got the approval. Once we got the FDA clearance, what we had to do was to think about how to actually get it in the hands of clinicians, and that's where we thought that Boston Scientific, with the incredible resources that they have and the penetration that they have at the hospitals, would be the right entity to do that, which is why the Boston Scientific entity basically took over the company and is now distributing this product. But it's to me, it's just an example of how clinical problem presented by the practitioner to a scientist who has materials that they may not know the right application for, and really developing the right set of performance criteria on these materials so that you can actually push it together and have the right early team to go over all the challenges that exist with early startups and getting them to a successful endpoint. So I think it was a really educational journey, and at some point, it's something that I'm definitely interested in repeating and also educating other people about.
So we talked about two of them now. Obsidio and Omeat, but you also have BioRay. So give us a set of BioRay.
Yeah, and BioRay is even an earlier stage company, which is kind of trying to address some of the delivery challenges that exist with traditional drug delivery approaches, and using basically a technology that is minimally invasive. It's a patch that has very, very small microneedles that if you put on the body, you will not feel. But those microneedles can be used to actually either deliver compounds into the body or be able to extract fluids like interstitial fluid and then use that for biosensing applications. So it's a company that it's very early stages. There's very clear synergies with some of the other efforts that are happening at the institute. For example, the wearable patches that have electronics on them, utilizing some of the technologies for BioRay to address some of their challenges, and a variety of other needs. So it's an earlier stage company, but we're very excited about the technology, and we're kind of building the team and the one indication that we think is the right indication at this point.
So, we've had a pretty interesting discussion on all the innovation that you're driving and you're heading up. Is there one sort of moonshot one that looks really interesting and maybe it's a little bit further out, but it's like a big idea? Like all of the you've given me already big ideas, but even that's like, oh gosh, that's like a huge idea.
Yeah. So one of the things, so obviously, like, there's lots of different things that I think are super important to go after. But one of the ones that I felt was a major challenge when it came to COVID and dissemination of the vaccines globally was the need for really crazy conditions to deliver the vaccines to different places. So there were a significant amount of need for -80 cold chain. So -80 degrees Celsius is not easily achievable. And if that's the temperature that was needed to deliver the vaccines across the globe, then you can imagine how challenging that was, and then how many countries, independent of the production levels of this, would not be able to get those vaccines in sufficient time. So one of the challenges that we think has happened is mRNA molecules are inherently unstable. And that is why we need these really cold conditions to be able to preserve them. But we know through other sorts of literature that there's other materials out there that can actually be helpful in maintaining biological molecules. For example, like we've heard about Jurassic Park and like the amber keeping the DNA of the dinosaurs. Now, it doesn't need to be as as effective, but there are materials out there that can actually interact with these biological nucleic acid materials and then be able to preserve them better. So at the Institute, we have a project that I'm very excited about is to really enable us to create these sorts of vaccines and other RNA therapeutics, but keep them super stable at room temperature. So that's something that we're kind of working towards. We have a few different approaches that have shown some promising results. And the vision is that in the future, you can literally have your vials, ship them anywhere, and they can be used all very rapidly and without having to have airplanes that are equipped with -80 freezers, shipping across the world. So that's kind of something that we think is going to make things a lot better for any future pandemics, as well as normal, basically therapeutic delivery that's going to happen, because a lot of things that in the future are going to be nucleic acid based treatments, whether it's gene delivery or mRNA drugs. And we think that having ways to make them shelf stable is going to be very beneficial in enabling that. So that's something I'm personally very excited about.
So I'm just doing a time check. Do you have a hard stop at about 8 minutes?
I can stay a little bit longer, no problem.
Okay. So, I mean, Bob Langer is almost like a mentor. He's a friend. And in fact, he keynoted your first Innovation Summit. A remarkable journey. And I know Michael's been on the road because they're doing their own fund and so on. Are you going to collaborate closely with what they're doing or continue that collaboration?
Yeah, so Michael Langer, Bob's son, has been a great friend since he was um, almost in diapers, I would say. So I was in Bob's lab over 20 years ago, and at that point, Michael and his brother and sister were really these little kids who would come to our events. We would go to their summer beach parties. And it's been great to see all Langer kids grow up and do incredible things themselves. Michael is actually someone who's been very interested in innovation. As you mentioned, they're starting a VC fund, and he has been more and more interested in what the Institute is doing. Is basically joined the leadership board of the Institute, and I can see us working a lot more together in the future to build bridges between what we're doing at the Institute and the translational capability that they're building in their fund.
Yeah, and I guess Bob himself, because he's a good friend, right? And it was a mentor, but now it's sort of like the student to the mentor are equals. That's the way I see it. Or
yeah, I wouldn't say we're no one is ever going to be equal to Bob, but we can all do well trying.
well, he says very good things about you, though, right? So I mean, and he's one of 12 institutional professors at MIT, very, very successful. He's spun out what or invested in something like 40 companies. Just a remarkable history. I think his citations out of what, somewhere between 350 to 400,000.
Yeah.
So just a remarkable sort of friendship and sort of collaborating in some way and exploring and continuing that collaboration. On your website, then, are there particular areas where people can see like the companies that you're more near term spinning out, and ones that are in the queue for longer term spinning out, so that people around the world can say, "Hey, I want to collaborate, or I want to help them, or support them, or I want to co-invest," or maybe there's some areas where they can engage in some way?
Yeah, definitely. So going back a little bit just about Bob Langer, I think the most impressive thing about Bob Langer is his humility and humanity. Bob is passionate about what he does. He spends every waking hour trying to improve human condition, and that's done through many different ways. One of them is whether you're a student emailing him from sub-Saharan Africa or you're the president of a country, he gives you the time to really make you feel heard and tries to help any way he can. And that, to me, is no one else in the world I've ever seen has done that to the same level as Bob Langer. And that's separate from his true impact, which is, as you mentioned, in co-founding companies like Moderna and many other medical therapeutics that are now used all over the world. By some estimates, there's been, over 2 billion people who've been affected directly by Bob's technologies and innovation. So the fact that he's also so humble is just incredible, and he's just an incredible role model. At some point, if I ever get the time, I need to write a whole book about Bob Langer and how to aim to be Bob. Regarding the second point, we think that obviously it takes a village to make innovation happen. We're always interested in linking with partners, whether it's through collaboration, whether it's through just telling people what we do, or whether it's through working towards building a startup. So one of the things that we've done is we created a whole process to make innovation happen and build a whole team that helps us in pushing that forward. The leader of that team is Maurizio Vecchioni, who's our Chief Innovation Officer, and he has incredible experience in building endeavors and building organizations and startups. So he would be probably a point person to always reach out to really understand the latest about what the Institute is doing and where the opportunities are. And of course, I always make myself available. We try to keep the website and other things as updated as possible, but things always move so fast. If people are interested at the Institute, I also recommend them to sign up to our newsletters, because we try to always provide some of the latest things that are happening in our newsletters. And but we try to make ourselves available. Again, one thing I learned from Bob Langer is that if anyone tries to reach out to me through email, I'll do my best to make sure that they get a response as fast as possible.
In fact, I see you blog about you just can't believe when people don't respond, right?
Exactly. That's one of my pet peeves. I'm like, if people like Bob Langer, who are some of the most busy people in the world, can make time for anyone in the world, then me or anyone else has no reason to say I'm too busy to respond.
Now, you got your master's and your bachelor's from the University of Toronto, and then you get your PhD in biomedical or bioengineering from MIT. Do you still stay in contact with the University of Toronto? And
of course, yeah. So that's my alma mater. I really think Toronto and the University of Toronto is where I found my passion for science, research, and innovation. And I definitely would not have been in the area that I am if it wasn't directly associated with the professors that I worked with in my early research at the University of Toronto. So I have very bittersweet memories from Toronto. I was at the University of Toronto for 6 years. So at some point, the walls of the building start closing down on you and you're like, I need to get out. But at the same time, it was a place where I learned quite a bit. One of the things I tell people is that it took me 5 years of working day and night in the lab to publish my first paper. So that shows that it's not about winning from day one. It's about learning and persevering. And I think that a lot of those things that I learned at the University of Toronto have really helped me throughout my career. And so I'm always very indebted to University of Toronto, as well as MIT, which was also an incredible experience. And, I just think when you're developing your vision and your career and your passion, those are times that, you can't go back to, but you're always, indebted to them.
yeah, and then there's your time at Harvard, of course, and then UCLA, and now at the Terasaki Institute. And just for the audience, and you got over 700 peer-reviewed journal articles, editorials review papers, over 70 books and chapters, edited books, over 50 patents, patent applications, and over 125,000 citations. But that's such a moving needle that every time I look, it's up thousands, right? So just a really remarkable contribution. And you're so accessible, which is really unusual. And so you're really living the legacy of and the continuing contribution of Bob Langer, right? Because you're also making yourself accessible. So I thank you for coming in. So this is the last question. What recommendations you want to leave to the audience?
Well, given that the audience is very broad, and obviously people who have already found their ways, I think for them, I would say that there's lots of opportunities in the future of biology, and we're trying to enable them at the Institute. For younger folks, I would say that find your passion and get great mentors. And then once you find it, just have incredible amount of grit. Don't give up, and remain passionate, and good things will happen.
Well, you definitely live all of that and more. So thank you for sharing so much with my audience.
Thank you, Stephen. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.